Hi, everyone. Welcome to Explicitly Pro-Life. I'm your host, Kristan Hawkins, and today we have a very special guest. This woman is someone I found on TikTok after her video went viral as she shared the raw and powerful story, her testimony of choosing life after rape, after sexual assault. Angela Harders said no to abortion more than 10 years ago. The decision came with two life changing phone calls, one to a pregnancy care center and the other to a Planned Parenthood. Why did Angela choose not to go through with her abortion at Planned Parenthood? Why is she now courageously sharing her story and standing up for preborn children, which sadly many in our country believe shouldn't have a right to be born because of their fathers? We're going to talk to her about that and much more on today's episode. So let's dig in. You were joining me today on campus, and I wanted you to kind of come and hear what we're doing at Students for Life and how we have conversations at James Madison University. But it didn't take about 15 minutes before the issue of rape came up. Mm-hmm. And this gentleman I was talking to said, "Well, what about the case of rape?" No, sorry, actually, no, it was a woman, because she said to me, oh, it was a man you talked to.
Yes.
But the first conversation, before you got there, I was like, where's she at? Because the first girl I talked to, like literally the first conversation, she said, well, if I were raped, I think I would kill myself if I became pregnant. And so you weren't there yet. And then you came on like quickly after. And so I did my best to talk to her. But then the young man said the same thing. Well, what about rape? And then I was like, Angela, where are you? And you shared with him your story. Can you share with everybody who's watching your story? Because I find it's just, we talk about facts, mm-hmm. and we can talk about right and wrong. We talk about field development. We talk all these things, but I think it's definitely different and a lot more powerful when somebody in your shoes can talk about your story and what happened and how you worked through that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I've been watching your work for a really long time, and I've been so inspired by all the work that you've done and the lives that you've changed by taking on this very, very important work. I understand the power and the impact of being a part of the pro-life movement, because I joke I was born into the pro-life movement. I was born in 1987, and my dad was actually the vice president of our local pregnancy center in Maryland. And the pregnancy center was born the same year as me. And so I really have grown up within the pro-life community my whole life. I've always considered myself to be pro-life. I've very much understood the arguments for and against, and I've been actively a part of advocating for pro-life and over the years. And so I ended up finding myself in my own crisis pregnancy when I was raped 10 years ago. And my immediate reaction, even though I am devoutly pro-life, I'm very pro-life, a strong advocate for being pro-life, my gut reaction was to immediately call Planned Parenthood. I was so terrified, so overwhelmed, and without thinking, I just was like, I have to get rid of it. I have to deal with this problem. No one can know about this. This will be the end of my life. And so I called Planned Parenthood and I booked an appointment for an abortion, even though I was very pro-life. I am very pro-life.
And you're saying 10 years ago, you're 36?
Yeah.
Okay. So you were late 20s. You weren't just a 16-year-old scared girl. You've probably thought about this issue and talked about it for years. But still, your natural instinct in that moment of crisis is get rid of the problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It was complete fear. At the time, I was a public school teacher. And ironically enough, part of my job as being a public school teacher was that I had to help teach the sex education with the 5th and 6th graders.
Okay.
And so part of that conversation was sharing with them about my stance and my belief of waiting until marriage. All my students knew that I wasn't dating anyone. I was really wanting to wait and save myself for my husband. And so I had spoken very openly about the fact that I was waiting for marriage, and I talked to them about abstinence and the importance of waiting, and the wisdom that there is in that. And so, of course, when I found myself pregnant, I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to explain this, to these people? I never imagined in a million years that that I would be pregnant, especially from a rape. I never imagined that would ever happen to me. And so I found out on a Tuesday. It was the first week of school, so the students hadn't gotten there yet. And I scheduled the appointment for Friday. And when I called Planned Parenthood, they ask you a bunch of questions on the phone. And one of the questions that she asked me was, why was I considering this? And so I shared with her that I wanted to be a missionary. I really wanted to be able to travel the world. And I was really scared that this would kind of mess up all my plans, and, that I was a Christian and I was involved in my church. And I didn't know how I would ever be able to explain this to, my church, my friends, my students, my whole world.
I know, because I've thought about this before. Like, you can't just wear a T-shirt like, yes, I'm single, I'm not married, I was raped.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want, that's not something you want to broadcast to the whole world.
No.
But as a Christian, you already came out and said, I'm waiting until marriage. Okay. I'm sorry.
No.
I'm like processing it as I'm hearing your story. And these are things that I remember when I was kind of grappling with the issue of abortion and cases of rape. These are questions I had in my head. So
yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and I had a lot of fears around that, and mostly a lot of fear, a lot of shame. Just not sure how to explain this, and worried about how people would judge me or view me for this without having to explain or disclose everything that had happened to me. For me, it was something that was very traumatic and private.
And how you just like tell the whole world.
Yeah, and so that idea of like, do I tell people what happened and have them know this dark secret that I had been trying to hold together and kind of move on with my life as though nothing had ever happened to me? Or do I want to, expose this, and then what would people think of the baby or me? And just the whole world of that was very difficult for me. So I had the appointment scheduled for Friday, and the entire next day, so this was Tuesday that I found out while I was at school, and the entire next day I was like, I cried the whole day. I was just devastated. So overwhelmed just with the weight of the choice, because I wasn't going into it thinking that it was a clump of cells. Like a lot of women, I think, can kind of disassociate in that sense, or they try to justify it because in their minds they truly believe, this isn't murder, it's just a clump of cells. But I knew what I was doing. I was very aware of, the abortion instruments that they use. I've seen the babies, I've seen the videos, I've seen the process of how they do abortions. Like, I was very aware of what I was doing. I was very aware of what I was choosing. And yet the fear just seemed so insurmountable. And because my dad was so involved in the with our local pregnancy center, I knew that I could call a pregnancy center for help.
Yeah.
And I was terrified to call one close to me, because I said, if I call anyone in the state of Maryland, they're going to know who I am because of my dad, and my family, that we've been involved with the pro-life movement. And so I called a pregnancy center that was in New York. I figured that's far enough away, they won't know who I am. And when I called the pregnancy center in New York, the lady answered the phone, and I couldn't even speak. I just cried. And the lady was so sweet. She said, "It's okay. I'm here. Whenever you're ready, we can talk." And so I just cried for a long time. And then when I was able to compose myself, I shared with her about what had happened, and that I had this, I had an abortion appointment scheduled. It was in 2 days. And I'm kind of mentally and emotionally preparing for that day. And this lady said something to me that I will never forget. She said, "Angela, sex doesn't make babies, God does." And it was like this light bulb just went off in my head. And I said, what? You're right. And she said, there are women all over the world that have sex all the time, hoping and praying that God will give them a baby. And yet for some reason they don't. And then she said, there are women all over the world that, have sex once and it happens. And she said, so just the act of having sex doesn't cause a person to be pregnant or not. She said, for some reason, God is choosing to give you a life out of this terrible circumstance. And when she said that to me, it was like immediately this peace just came over me. And I knew, I said, I know that despite of the terrible thing that had happened to me, that God was going to use this for good. And that only God could turn something that was meant that I thought would be the death of me and give me hope and give me life and give me joy out of something that was so terrible. And so after I hung up from the phone with her, I felt so inspired. I felt so full of peace, but I still was, nervous. And then I got to Friday, and I knew that I needed to cancel my appointment. So Friday morning, I called Planned Parenthood, And I said, I need to cancel my appointment for today. And the lady who answered the phone when I called was the same lady who took my call when I had booked the appointment the first time. And the lady said to me, I remember that you told me that you wanted to be a missionary in Guatemala. You wanted to travel the world. She said, that if you go through with this, you'll never be able to be a missionary. You'll never be able to do that because in those cultures, they don't really tolerate, it's not really acceptable to be a single mom and a missionary in those areas
general,
where
I've never met a single mom who's a missionary besides just surviving life. Right?
Yeah. So, and especially in like very conservative cultures, like in
Sure.
Latino cultures, it's not really acceptable to be a single mom there. It's viewed very poorly. And so she said that you do realize that if you go through this, you'll never be able to do the things that you believe that you want to do with your life.
So empowering.
Yeah, so empowering. And then she said to me, she's like, we can take care of this problem and no one will ever have to know. And as she said that to me, I just remember thinking, I'm like, this problem? You can take care of this problem? Like, what do you mean? No one will know? I will know. Yeah. And so that was what I said to her. I said, no, I would know and God would know. And that's enough. And so I hung up the phone and decided that I was going to carry my child to term. At the time, I didn't know what I was going to do, but I decided I was going to carry to term. And yeah, that was it. 2 different phone calls.
That's unbelievable. I mean, did you ever call the pregnancy center and to tell them, like, hey, you saved my child's life?
No, I didn't. I to be honest, I don't even remember the name of the pregnancy center. I wish that I did. I so desperately wish that I could call the lady and thanked her. Because working with the pregnancy center, I know how many times people answer the phone calls and they're on the hotline and they take these calls from women in these crisis pregnancy centers that are just, in the state of shock and stress and anxiety and confusion and they don't know what to do. And so many times we take these calls, but you never know the end result of it. You never know, did they choose life? Did they go through with their plan? And I wish I could tell her thank you.
I think that's a good lesson, I think, for all of us in the pro-life movement, because we hear that a lot. I get to see it now at campuses. I think at least 3 students who came up to me today who have recently changed their minds on abortion. And, it was a video they saw or something that one girl told me about a conversation she had with her friends. And I'm like, I don't, who knows if all of these people know, but that's what we do in the pro-life movement. That's why we carry forward, right? Because we don't know the lives that were saved. So I guess so you courageously choose life. You see through the sales that Planned Parenthood was trying to win, sales pitch there. What happened next? Because it did obviously just like everything was like fine and dandy.
No. To be honest, I told my best friend that I was pregnant, but I didn't tell anyone else in my family.
Oh, wow.
I was really scared. I was not sure how to have that conversation. After I was raped, my kind of trauma response was I kind of just tried to go on with my life as though nothing happened.
So you had did you not told your family you had been raped?
I had not. No, I didn't tell anyone that had happened to me. I did speak with the police after that, and after I found out that I was pregnant, I was like, okay, what should I do about this? And they said that in the state where I live, that fathers have rights over their children regardless of the way that they were conceived.
In Maryland,
yes,
liberal, pro-abortion Maryland
yes.
that is trying to put abortion up to the moment of birth in their constitution, who thinks that children have no rights to live, thinks that rapists should have access to their babies.
Yes, and yes, and
if you live in Maryland, that's an action item for you. Yeah, okay, just keep going. Sorry.
No, it's fine.
Action.
But the police officer told me, he said that if you want child support, then yeah, go for it. But he said if you would like to live your life without this person in your life, which of course I did. I didn't want to see him again. I didn't want to have anything to do with him again. If you want to move on with your life without him, then you should not press charges. You should not do anything, because they said that if you were to press charges, he would still have rights as a father regardless, because they make a distinction between the father's relationship with the mom versus his relationship with the kids. And they said they wouldn't be able to protect my daughter unless he had done something to her specifically. So that for me was really terrifying. And I said, nope.
So you never even pressed charges against your rapist?
No. They said if you want to protect your child from him.
And he's still like out there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really hard to hear.
Yeah. And so I didn't tell my family until I was like almost 6 months pregnant, was when I told my parents. So
how did your parents, who are pro-life, take this news?
My dad was amazing. And I knew he would be, you know.
Sort of his job.
Yeah.
I was like, if you answer the wrong way, we got problems.
No, my dad was amazing. He, when I shared with him, he just stood up and he came over and he just hugged me. And he said, "It's going to be okay. We're going to get through this together. You're not alone." That was exactly what I needed to hear, that I'm not alone. No. And that he would be there with me every step of the way. So that was my dad's response. My mom was a little bit different. My mom was very angry at the beginning.
Well, yeah, because her baby girl was sexually assaulted.
Yeah. I think that really hurt her, that I didn't share with her and that I was processing through that alone. As you know, at the time I didn't understand, but now as a mom, I understand how painful that must have been for my mom to know that I had to walk through that by myself, and that I didn't share with her about what had happened to me. But now my dad actually passed away 2 years ago. And we live with my mom. Both of them were such a huge blessing for me and my daughter, and they adore her. And it was just incredible the way that they handled the whole thing. And in fact, there was a point that when things kind of settled down a little bit, my dad actually came to me and he said, "Angela, I want you to know that I think that you should think about, have you thought about adoption?" He said, "I want you to know that you don't have to parent this child yourself. Like, you're young, you're single, you're a teacher, you're busy. Like, if you don't want to take on having a child yourself, like, know that you have other options. Would you want to think about adoption?" My parents actually offered to adopt her for me if I didn't feel like I could care for her myself. My sister even offered to. My sister was married and had her own kids. She offered to adopt my baby if I wanted to do that. But the words of the lady from the pregnancy center just rang so true for me, that for some reason God was choosing to give me this life, and I knew that she was meant to be mine. But I was so thankful that they gave me the option to choose, to choose if I wanted to consider adoption or if I wanted to choose to raise her myself. And so I did, and my daughter's actually going to be turning 10 next week.
That's awesome. That's so awesome here. Did you ever feel like during the pregnancy or even after, when the reality of being a single mom is set in, that there's like a regret for you choosing life?
No. Honestly, no.
Because that's what we hear, right? We hear, like, I've heard that on campuses before of like, well, she might choose not to have an abortion, but later down the road, this is going to destroy her life.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, and I can't name, and I volunteered at a pregnancy center. I've obviously been around the movement for a long while. I have never met a woman, no matter what the terrible circumstance she was in when she conceived, that has said, yes, I absolutely chose raw.
Yeah. Actually, that was one of the things that really surprised me when my video on TikTok went viral. I was surprised because I got to see really two different patterns of comments with the people that responded. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, I got hundreds of comments from women all over the place saying that they were in a similar situation, or they had been pregnant as a result of sexual assault. At the time, I didn't know anyone that had been in that because I never talked about it. Yeah. And so now I'm getting connected with all of these women that said that they had been pregnant as a result of sexual assault, or they had an unplanned pregnancy or crisis pregnancy, mm-hmm. and they chose life, and that they didn't regret it for a minute. I know. we need a support group.
No, like, you need a support group for yourselves, but then you also need, like, even thinking about action item number 2. Like, you think about Silent No More, the impact that Silent No More has had, right? Of, mm-hmm. like, getting post-abortive men and women to, one, come together so they can seek healing together, mm-hmm. share their stories, help get closure. But then, 2, sharing those stories publicly to bring out other women and men who are still struggling from abortion, mm-hmm. to get them healed. But then also to change minds. Like, we need a national group of, I don't know, courageous badasses. I don't know what you want to call yourselves, but like you are like the most courageous people on this planet, and you need your own like union, like unionize, Angela.
We
I'm not, like,
should.
pro-union and like some other things. I think workers should have the freedom to choose whether or not they choose a union. But I mean, that's like, that would be so. I mean, just think about all the people that came out, like, you feel like you just said, like, I felt alone. Like, no, you're not alone. Like, the Elliott Institute, I mean, there's not a lot of studies because we don't have a national abortion reporting law, which I feel like I'm a broken record saying that. But I know that the one Elliott Institute study said it was like, of the women who conceived during sexual assault, like 50% of them or more don't choose abortion. They choose to parent or place an adoptive family. But yet 100% of the assumption in our culture and on campuses and in politics is, of course, it's abortion.
Yeah.
But I'm like, that's not actually the reality. But then there's nobody saying like, hey, we're like the 50% plus that didn't choose abortion. Like, where's our help? Because I guess that leads me, I was like writing down some questions because as you talk, I'm like, oh my gosh, all these thoughts were like going through my head. Like when you went public, so you went public with your parents. But how did you have, like, what was the response when you were like at school in the teacher's lounge, which, no offense, but I can imagine a lot of teachers in Maryland are very liberal on the issue of abortion. Yeah. Like, did everyone say, wow, you're amazing and you're a courageous badass? Or was there mixed responses?
Yeah, with the staff at the school, I didn't tell them like the circumstances that surrounded my pregnancy.
That's true. They'd probably be more accepting of you being
a single
mom who just had sex and there was an oopsie.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty stunning statement.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I'll keep going.
Yeah. So I didn't tell them the results. Part of the reason why, again, I didn't want people to look at my child weird, like I'd heard people make comments of like, oh, how can you keep the rapist baby, or they call it like the rapist spawn
residue.
Yeah, like things like that, terms that are so degrading, and I just want to be like, no, like she's just as much mine, just because it takes two to make it, but she's half mine, like she has my DNA in her, she's part of me. And I don't want to have other people identify my child with that. And so, so I didn't tell anyone. And I ended up transferring to another school the following year. So I didn't have to see anyone from that school again. I transferred to a county that was closer to my home because I was, moved back with my parents. And
had baby coming.
Yep.
How did, I guess, what happened that made you want to go public with your story? I mean, going public's hard. Like, at some point, have you told your daughter, like, what's the decision making there about, yes, I'm going to share my story? Like, why did you make that decision, and how's it going, I guess?
So that was a big question that I had, and again, there's no guide, there's no manual to tell you how do you have these conversations with a kid. My commitment was that I would always speak openly and honestly with my daughter in age-appropriate ways whenever she asked. So anytime that she had a question, I wanted to answer her as honestly as I could. And so the first time that she asked me a question was when she was 3. And she went to a pre-K program, and it was the first day of school, and they all had to draw pictures of their families. And she was the only one who didn't have a picture of a dad, like didn't have a dad in her picture. And she came home from school and she said, Mom, why don't I have a dad? And I looked at her and I said, sweetie, you do have a dad. Like, God is your father. He's my father too. He loves you and he loves me, and he's always going to be there for us. And I said, but the dad that made you, he made some bad choices in his life, so he's not a part of our lives. And that was enough for her.
Yeah, for a 3-year-old, you've answered the question.
Yep. She's like, okay. And then moved on. And that was about it. And then as she's, gotten older, of course, she's, asked other questions and wanted to, see a picture of him. He was actually a relative of a friend of mine. And yeah, so she's, seen pictures of him. And so, yeah, it's just kind of, as she's growing older, but it's not really something that comes up for her. I think she's very happy with the life that we have. And,
But at some point,
yes, I'll have to, share with her the details of that, and why I made the decisions that I did, and we'll have to cross that bridge when it comes, but it hasn't come yet. So, yeah,
I think that's something that we don't often think about is how do we, even when we start telling our stories, how do we tell our children in a way that's age appropriate and that helps them kind of understand these very hard things that have gone on in the adult world. Yeah, that was my big question because I struggle with that, with having 2 children with cystic fibrosis of how much information do we give them? And now my son just turned 15 and he has a cell phone so he can look up things. And so you never want to hide information, but at the same time, you don't want to scare them or, traumatize them even further than they've already been traumatized, knowing that they have potentially life-limiting illness.
Yeah.
So that's, I just, you are the woman that's being talked about, like, in every abortion conversation.
Yep. Like,
every single, it came up at least, the one time you weren't there, which I was like, where's she at? And it came up at least 2 or 3 times. One other time I was like, she's over there talking to somebody else. Like, she's right there, Angela. You come up all the time. Like, you're on the nightly news. I think Donald Trump is talking. It's everywhere because there's this even hearing what the former president who's now running for president again saying about abortion of I support abortion up until 16 weeks. We don't know why this random point of time was chosen. But of course there'll be exceptions, of course there'll be exceptions for rape. And so if you do the math, the analytical part of my brain's like, all right, so by the time you do exceptions and 16 weeks, maybe we'll save 5% of children. Maybe. Now, I'm not going to knock it because at least the president has said abortion's a federal issue because some of these guys who are running for federal office are there's no federal role. I'm like, Joe Biden has clearly demonstrated abortion's a federal issue. So yay, good job on that. Bad job on this, good Trump, bad Trump, right? But okay, that doesn't, but why is this the assumption that of course we need to allow abortion? How does that make you feel when you hear these politicians that are like, I am pro-life, and of course a woman who's raped needs to be able to have an abortion?
Honestly, it makes me really upset. You're talking about my child. You're saying that my daughter would have been better off dead than to be raised in a home where she's loved and wanted. And I tell people all the time, unplanned does not mean unwanted or unloved. And my daughter is very much loved, and she brings light and joy to everyone who's around her. And the world would be worse off if she was not in it. And so it makes me very upset when people use circumstances like mine as an excuse to justify additional violence to a woman. And it makes me very upset, to think that a woman can't go through something hard and traumatic and still find room for hope and for love and for joy in spite of the terrible circumstances that we may encounter as women. It's very degrading and demeaning to women.
Yeah, I think Ryan Balmer, who was conceived and raped, is a good friend of mine. He's been on the Kristan Hawkins show before. He says, I am the 1% that's used to justify 100% of abortions. And I feel so bad for him to think about the weight that must be on his shoulders and other children who were conceived and raped who are now adults and speaking out. Because, I think about even Norma Corby's story, the Roe from Roe versus Wade. And, when she kind of became a Christian and started speaking out, the mental anguish that woman had to endure every day, knowing that in her name, thousands of babies were being killed, violently ended every day. It's very hard, I think, for any of us who aren't that person to kind of understand how to process that and how to move forward with that. And I think it's so sad because it's there's been a lot of counsel now within the broader pro-life leaders of we need to cave on this issue. We literally, this is the discussion, and I'm gonna give you guys some behind the scenes stuff I'll probably get in trouble for. Someone will text me who watches this. There were literal discussions after the Ohio issue 1 failure, the failure for the pro-life movement to stop it pass, that we would have won Ohio if we would have caved on rape. If only the Ohio legislators in their heartbeat law had included a rape exception, the left would not have lied. I mean, it was like, even if they would have included the exception, first of all, you're assuming that people who want abortion aren't going to lie. Like, that doesn't, they're going to lie. Like, they lie all the time about how abortions are committed, right? But they were assuming that if the exception had been in there, that the Ohio issue 1 wouldn't have passed. And that if we are serious pro-lifers, and that if we want to seriously move the ball down the court and continue momentum, which is important, you need to continue momentum in social movements. You need to have wins. That's how you keep growing your base, right? If you always lose, people are like, I don't want to join that. They should, because that's still the right thing to do. But if we were really serious about growing the momentum, we just need to cave on these issues. And I'm like, I think by caving, you've undermined your entire point is why we do what we do.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you 1,000%. And the whole idea of like, if you cave, then they will justify that. That's just not true. I've spoken with many people who are pro-choice over the years, and I asked them, if I were to say, okay, we'll allow for rape and incest and life of the mother, and
which, by the way, we do. Every law has an exception for life of the mother.
Yes, they do. If we were to say, okay, would you agree to a ban on all other abortions except for those? And every single time their answer is, well, no. Like, it's not about the exceptions. No. It's not about the exceptions. They want the freedom.
They cite the exception.
They do.
Because they feel like that gives them a moral high ground in the argument.
Right.
That was interesting, because when I brought you over for that gentleman today, like, he thought he had this moral high ground, and then you told your story. I started tearing up. You were tearing up. He was being very patient, calm, and because he obviously knew you're a courageous badass, and let you tell your story. But then it was like, okay, but it's still not life. Like, he was like, you answered that question for him, and he realized there's nothing he can say that doesn't sound, stupid on this issue. He knew you had him on the argument, right? That he wasn't going to be able to say, but your life was better off if your daughter's dead. Like, that would sound really bad. So, but then he immediately went to, well, it's not life. So I'm like, okay. What do you mean it's not life? And then we started arguing about science, and then eventually I was like, your argument isn't about science, right? Because that's definitive. Your argument's about philosophy, Right. But you're right. It's not. He brought it up because he thought he was going to get the moral high ground, and then we totally vanquished that argument with you telling your amazing story, and then he immediately went to something else.
Yeah, because it's never been about the exceptions. It's never been about the exceptions.
I might just cut this and send this to, like, everybody in the pro-life movement. It's not, like, that's not their argument.
No.
It's not. And I know they like to think that they are these social justice warriors, and they care about women so much. Like, it's not what, at the end of the day, it's about. It's about, I think, if I were pro-choice, that my rights supersede the rights of my child. And that it's my life over hers.
Exactly. That is the whole crux of the argument. And when we look at the pro-choice position versus the pro-life position, the entire pro-choice position is based on fear. In essence, it's based on fear.
Yeah.
Fear of, what will my parents think? What will I can't do this because my boyfriend will leave me. I can't do this because I won't graduate college. I can't do this because I'm 16 years old, whatever the fear may be. I can't do this because of X, Y, Z. I can't afford this. I can't, whatever. Like, the entire conversation, the entire motivation, at least, and especially in my case, was around fear. I wanted to have an abortion because I was terrified. It wasn't any positive, like, yeah, let's go, this will be great. No, it was like, I've got all these fears that I'm dealing with, and this seems like the best way to just have all the fear go away. I could just deal with the problem, take away the problem, right? But that's not the case. The pro-life movement is the exact opposite. Instead of having a fear response, it's a faith response.
Yeah.
The pro-choice movement says you can't finish college. You can't support a child by yourself. You can't be a single mom. You can't raise a child on your own. You can't face your family and your church and your friends. You can't finish high school. Like, you can't. But the pro-life movement is the exact opposite. It says you can. You can be a single mom. You can carry this child to term. You can be brave. You can be strong. You can be resourceful. You can graduate. You can fulfill all your dreams. You can live out your career. All these things, like, you can. That's the message of pro-life. That's my message to women. Is that Rather than listening to all the you can'ts in your life, no, I must stand that you absolutely can. You are infinitely more powerful than you ever imagined was possible. And there's no circumstance in your life that is going to be too big for you or too big for God. And that's what women need to hear. That's what women need to hear. You can absolutely do this. You are infinitely more powerful than you could ever imagine. And having a baby is not going to take away from your dreams or your hopes or your goals or your plans. Having a baby, having a child is one of the greatest gifts that a human being could ever have. Being a mom is one of the greatest gifts. And it's not easy. Well, being a mom is not easy. It's not easy, but it is such a blessing. And I don't know a single woman who regrets choosing life. And I know thousands that regret choosing abortion.
When you put your story up on TikTok and you said you got kind of different responses, like, did you have people who are hostile and like trying to like abortion explain to you like your life must be miserable, like were pro-choice people at least respectful and say, that's an interesting perspective, I never thought about that way?
Most of the responses I got were, well, 3. I would say I got 3 main responses back. One was other women that commented saying that they were experiencing something similar, that they chose life and they were so grateful. And so many women commented, my problem is turning 30. My problem is 12 years old. My problem is 4 years old now. It was so beautiful to see these women just sharing that what to Planned Parenthood was just a problem to eliminate. To them as a child that has a life who's growing in an adult.
Transforming our world.
Yeah, changing our world. And then the second big response that I got was women who chose the opposite. Women who said, I wish that someone would have told me what that woman on the thing on the line had told you. I wish that I would have called a pregnancy center and heard someone tell me you can do this. If someone would have just told me you can do this, my child would be XYZ years old. Or women tell me I live with years of regret. Every year I regret the moment that I ended my child's life. So that was the second kind of very common theme, was all these women that were openly sharing that they'd chosen abortion and they're living with decades of regret. And then the third response was kind of the pro-choice people that were like, that's great for you, but you chose that. You had a choice, right? So that was kind of the third response that I wasn't really sure how to deal with that. It was almost like this, we're glad that you made that choice, but someone else might want to choose something differently. And like the choice that you're talking about as a child, it's a human being.
Advocating for death for my daughter.
Yeah, or for someone else's daughter. And her body matters just as much as mine. And just because my body was violated doesn't give me a right to violate hers.
Did you have any women who were survivors of sexual assault who chose abortion who were mad at you for sharing your story?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of. The people that responded, like I said, that had commented and shared that they had experienced sexual assault were so grateful that they chose life.
Thank God you did that video.
Yeah.
Put that video up there. What's your, I have to do a couple questions from the audience.
Okay.
From my circle community. But what do you want the pro-life movement to hear? Because mostly there's pro-lifers who tune into my podcast.
Yeah.
Sometimes pro-choice people share with friends. But what do you want pro-life, specifically young people, to take away from hearing your story? Do you want them to use your story next time they're on campus and say, well, I know this woman, Angela, let me tell you her story. Like, what do you want? What's your message to all of us about what we should do better? You can be bossy. I'm pretty bossy. It's fine.
I think my message to people in the pro-life community would be to not give up and to be willing to engage in conversations with people about this topic. The only way that we're going to be able to make a difference is the more that we do exactly what you're doing. We take the time to engage with people about these ideas. We share stories. We share this message of empowerment to women. And I think that that's what will make the difference. And the other thing I would like to say is if you are working or not working, please volunteer at your local pregnancy center. I know that there are pregnancy centers all over the world that desperately need volunteers and help and support and resources. And like I said, you may not know the fruit of your labor, the lady that I spoke to on the phone, but that lady saved 2 lives that day. She really did. She saved my daughter's, but I had no idea that she was going to save mine too. And I'm eternally grateful for her. I wish that I could thank her. I wish I knew who she was so that I could thank her myself.
Mm.
But that would be my message. Don't give up. This fight is too important. Their lives truly matter when we understand the weight of the work that we're doing. Like they're real human beings.
Mm-hmm.
They're real human beings.
And we see them on ultrasound. We know the real human beings.
We do.
Despite what the pro-abortion people might tell us on campuses. Mm-hmm. Okay, I have one more question. I lied. I was thinking about this when you were talking. You mentioned your church a couple of times. I know you and I talked before the podcast started about, you're a Christian.
Yes.
You want to be a missionary. And you came from a church that was you grew up in a church that was very conservative. Your pastor actually was Joshua Harris, right?
Yes.
And for the Gen Zers out there, you can Google Joshua Harris. He, in the 90s, was a pretty big pastor. He wrote a book, I Kissed Dating.
I Kissed Dating Goodbye, yeah.
Yeah, so the whole thing was about purity culture and, don't kiss wait till you're
married. Yeah, I was going to say my first kiss from my wedding day and everything. Like, it was a big... Purity culture in the 90s was a big thing.
Yeah, it was a big deal. It's still a big deal, but it was a big deal.
Yeah.
How did your church? Because I'm thinking about your story because you said you didn't want to deal with the drama from the school, and so you relocated to a different school. You transfer. It's a little harder to transfer your church.
Yeah.
Especially in the evangelical world, I feel like it's very tight knit. And
yeah.
You went to kind of a bigger church, but it's still. Did you leave your church and go to another church, or how was the church in this?
Oh gosh, my church was really, really wonderful about it. They were very supportive.
That's awesome.
Yeah, they were very supportive. They just loved me through the whole thing. Loved my daughter through the whole thing. And actually, for Christmas, they even sent all the single moms in the church. They sent all the single moms a check for Christmas as a gift to just bless us.
That's awesome.
And I was not expecting that at all, but I was so thankful, and they really, put their money where their mouth is, right? We say we want to support single moms, and I know that's a big thing with the pro-choicers. Oh, you just care until they give birth, and then you let them, do their thing, You only care about them up until they give birth, but then we don't, care about them afterwards, which is so not true. But yeah, no, to see the way that they just continued to, provide support and, childcare. And I had friends from the church that would offer to do free childcare for me so that I could go have a minute to myself. And my church was very supportive. They were wonderful.
That's really great to hear, because I think that in other podcasts I've done and interviews of specifically Christian young women who got pregnant, not out of sexual assault, just whoopsie. We haven't always heard great stories. So it's really great to hear that story of your church and to take that away, that churches can be a big part of the solution here.
Oh, absolutely.
That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Angela, for sharing your story. Do you want to join me for the next segment of answering questions from the audience?
Absolutely.
All right. So we have 2 questions from the Circle community that I have.
Okay.
One is from Taylor. And I don't read these in advance. If I were smart, I would do that. But we just came back from campus and I barely had time to fix my hair for this. Okay. So from Taylor, what is the biggest lie our culture tells women?
That you can't.
That you can't.
You can't.
Good. We were on the same page. I was going to say that too. Yeah. No, that's it, right? You can't overcome this. You can't. Even though when I was on campus, I don't know if you heard towards the end, there was a future teachers group, and they're all young women, and they were shouting and talking over, because we were trying to have a conversation. Even the man I was debating was like, I'm getting lost in my train of thought, because they were being so loud, and they were talking about women's empowerment, women going to school, and I'm like, it's so sad, and I didn't have time to address them, but I'm like, it's so clear that you've just fallen for the lies of the abortion industry, because that was the undercurrent of their passive aggressive / maybe just aggressive and loud messages, was that they were there for women's empowerment, women's education, i.e. then you have to have an abortion.
Yeah, no, that's not true. If you think if people are facing an abortion, again, it's because they're processing and dealing with all these fears.
Yeah.
Fear that a boyfriend's going to leave them, or they're not going to graduate, or they can't financially afford it, or it's going to hurt. I had that one.
Well, it does.
It does. You can't get out of that one. But, they've got all these fears. And, if one of my friends was dealing with or processing some kind of fear in their life, my response to a friend dealing with or processing a fear wouldn't be to be like, oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah. I mean, gosh, you're never going to be able to graduate. You're never going to be able to have a good job and provide for yourself. Gosh, you are definitely not going to be able to, face humiliation and embarrassment. Like, no, I would never respond to another friend in that way, out of love for that person. No, we would speak life to them. Absolutely, you can. We would speak hope. We would speak faith. We would speak peace. We would speak, patience. And that's what we'd say when we love and care for someone. Yes, you can do this. You are powerful. You are brave. You are strong. You are, resilient. You are resourceful. You are capable. Like, yeah.
I love it. It's just preaching. You can take over the podcast. Right? Okay, so second question for it to go from Grace. Oh, this would be good. Both of us can answer this one. Okay. What is the hardest part about being a parent?
Oh gosh, you want to take this one first?
Sure. I mean, you're a single mom, so you can do it a little. You might have a different perspective than I do because I do have an amazing husband who I'm so blessed to have. The hardest part of being a parent, I think it's. This is why you should read questions beforehand so you can sound articulate, intelligent. I think it's the thought, and you forget this, and you're in your day-to-day world, and when you're just trying to survive, but they watch and listen to everything. You make an offhanded comment, and that absorbs like a sponge into their brain, right? So if you say something like, oh man, the storm clouds are rolling in, it's looking dark, I'm gonna pull up my weather app. Somebody who we've been living in a camper. So tornadoes are our biggest fear because they will destroy your house and can kill you, right? So every time we've been traveling, and so I have one son who's super afraid of tornadoes now. And so if you say oh, the storm clouds are unemployment. Not that you're fearing that there's a tornado. Maybe you're just thinking there's going to be wind or hail or whatever. Yeah. Wherever, it's what'd you just say? What's going on? Aww. And so you have to I mean, that's just a very trivial example of they notice everything. And you're just trying to survive sometimes. This is a mom of 4 who runs Students for Life and 100 team members in Child Country. I'm just trying to get my day done sometimes. And get everyone fed, all the medicines, all the breathing treatments in bed. And they notice everything. I don't know. I think when I look back at all the regrets I will have when my children are older will be one of those. And then also to know that, I think for me, the hardest thing is to remember that they're only young for so long. This is such a precious a little amount of time you've been granted with these little human beings. Yeah. And even though you're just trying to survive, those days are going to be over and all you'll be left with are your memories. Yeah. And they'll remember how you were working until 2 a.m. and not paying attention, playing Barbies with them. They'll remember that. Yeah. And you won't remember any of it. So I don't know.
I think for me, one of the most difficult parts about being a mom, I think is parenting my own inner child, healing from my own trauma. Because
we bring that to parenting, don't we?
We do. I think being a mom is so sanctifying. My daughter really has inspired me to reflect on the kind of person that I want to be in the world and the kind of person that I want to be for her. And that's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, to work on myself, my own patience and being selfless. And I think that would probably be the most difficult part for me, of healing my own stuff so that I can be the kind of mom that I want to be for her.
Yeah, I know. I remember at one point a few years ago, I was like, oh yeah, my parents really didn't know what the hell they were doing. They were just they were just trying to survive too. But as a child, you assume that the person who's parenting you and taking care of you knows everything. And you're like, no. When you become a parent yourself, you're like, no clue.
No manual.
No clue how to answer that question or what to do in this scenario. So there's parenting advice from Kristan and Angela. Take it or leave it, I guess. I think it was pretty good. But thank you guys for tuning in today. Thank you, Angela, for sharing your story. I know I have to conclude. We've run out of time. But before I do, where can people follow you and kind of if you're doing, are you doing more TikToks or?
I do, yeah. Actually, I make TikToks now about parenting.
Okay.
About parenting and about homeschooling and home education. So
Okay.
I used to be a public school teacher, as you guys know, and I left the school system to now homeschool my own kids.
Okay.
And help other families to do the same.
Okay.
And so you can find me on TikTok at Peaceful World Schooler.
Okay.
And also on Instagram at Peaceful World Schooler. And I have a YouTube channel, also Peaceful World Schoolers. And so, yeah, you can find me there.
Thank you all for joining us for this very important conversation today. I really hope you will share this impactful conversation on your social media, and make sure you are subscribing to this podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all the links from today's show are pasted down below in the notes. Don't forget to share this episode. It's so important we get it out. See you next time.